In today's Tough Talk, I sit down with my good friend, John Slick Baum. Now, Slick is by far one of the most incredible human beings I've ever gotten to know. And he is the essence of what I would call responsible reinvention. He was a Thunderbird pilot. He was a weapons instructor in weapons school. He then created one of the largest private air forces in the world, bigger than Canada's, which he recently sold. And he's now part of the Polaris program, which teaches SpaceX astronauts how to go into space. You have got to tune in for this story because I think there's a lot that you can take away from it. This is one of the most exciting things that I've done, at least in a week, if not a month, because John Baum flew all the way here from Pennsylvania, from a town I am horrible at pronouncing, to be in the Impact Factory, to dive in here. John Slick Baum. Slick is the name that you go by probably most, right?
It is. Yeah, I kind of forget that I have a real first name.
But John Baum is a pretty good name.
It's not bad.
And it was funny because I learned about John Baum through my good friend Grant and Shauna Corgan as they were prepping me for meeting one of the most incredible, not only pilots, but people I will have ever meet, right?
Well,
ever met, right? And so I go into Surf Ranch weekend. And Surf Ranch, just to get an understanding, you get there and then it's like off to the races and you're meeting the most incredible people. And I'm looking for this guy, John Baum. And I'm like, all right, I guess we're not going to hang out. And then it was on the last day, right after or right before closing ceremonies in the outer known kind of apparel center that I finally started talking to you. And then I put it together. I'm like, oh my God. This is John Baum. And it's amazing. Oh, God, here it is. And so we didn't really get that much time to hang out.
No.
But we somehow got each other's cell phones, and then the rest was truly history.
Truly.
So
yeah, it's been an accelerated friendship for sure from the time it was like, does this 32 look a little snug, or what do you think? Because we were like just shopping Kelly's store and loading up before we hit the road.
Well, I think one thing that really astounds me about you, John, and I would say almost to a fault, you are so humble and giving, right? And the way I set up John Baum is this. Here is a guy, right, that not only was in the Thunderbirds, right, was a Thunderbird pilot, but then we've got Top Gun school. Then he went off on his own, created one of the largest private air forces in the world, where you went and bought. I mean, I think people want to learn about how you did that. Then you sold that, and now you're working with Polaris and really training astronauts with the jets and doing air shows and basically helping civilians learn how to be astronauts to go into space via SpaceX.
That's a great summary.
Is that it? Okay.
That's great wave tops.
Anything else that I'm missing out on along the way? Because, I mean, it's incredible that one, that we were able to find enough time to get you here. But two, you know, one of the things that I want us to discuss is just time, right? And how you get asked to do a lot of things, right? Like, so how is it that you prioritize? I want to dive into all of it, but bring those people that don't know of you, because you've been so humble, they probably don't know about you, but how did you get to where you are today, John?
Well, I tell you, it's funny thinking about it. It was out of necessity, Chris. I mean, to be quite honest with you, I mean, I hear the resume and I appreciate, and I'm truly like heartfelt in the complimentary way that you introduce or describe me. But I just truly always say, like, none of that's supposed to be me, right? Grew up like a lot of people, broken home. I had great grandparents, we had a great family when we were younger, but of course, my parents got divorced when I was 2. And, my mother's from Korea. So having an immigrant mother who, speaks broken English, and then, having a dad who's, fighting for custody rights and being in the middle of all that, starting at that young age. I could really tell you some crazy stories because they're hard to tell, but it's true. Really had a really rough childhood, a lot of emotional abuse and things like that. So really, I was like 16. I was a junior in high school, and I realized, okay, something has to change, because the crowd that I was in, was like this kind of carpe diem surf skate crowd. Like, we're not going to do anything with our lives, and that was like the cool thing, like we'll be dead by we're 25. The kind of Point Break quote, right?
But this is also back when no one parented too, right? So can anyone
latchkey
do anything?
Kids, the whole 9 yards. So there was one thing that scholastically I even thought I was semi good at, and it was, I always loved art, but I picked up a 35 millimeter camera, and I had unlimited 35 or black and white film from school, and I became the editor in chief of my high school yearbook. I think mainly because I had a really cool hall pass. So hey, I need to leave because we're taking candid pictures of people doing stuff.
Totally.
And I was like, all right, so if I'm going to get on the straight and narrow here, and I wasn't a bad kid or anything like that, but I just had nothing going for me, right? Mentality from, my dad was like, hey, if you're lucky, you'll get a job, on a construction site with me, type of thing. It's like you were as good as long as your back was good, type of thing. So I went, okay, that's not what I want to do. I want to take pictures of my friends. I want to shoot videos. I loved photography, and every probably surfer and skater, you had all the magazines of, these really cool shots. And I'm like, I'm going to go to art school. I'm going to go to film school, travel, shoot videos of my friends surfing, cut videos, and it's just going to be an awesome life. And I'm like, but in order to do that, I need money for school. So that was, really my kind of initial trajectory of thinking about doing anything serious with my life other than just going out and raging with my friends on surfboards or skateboards or whatever. And the other thing that I really liked, which I think a lot of kids from the 80s, I've told the story a couple times, but the quick version is, again, we had no supervision, right? So I spent the summers with my mother, where she was working really hard during the day. So although we spent the summers with her, she was never home because she was working her butt off. And like, hey, Mom, the Transformers cartoon movie, just, can I go to the movies sometime this summer to go see that? And she's like, yeah. And so that was you got dropped off at the movies for the day, right?
Right.
So I snuck in to see Top Gun. And of course, well, that's awesome. What kid didn't like Top Gun in 1986? And then, of course, I got in trouble when I went home, to
and
my dad.
How old are you in 1986 for
10.
this? 10. So you're 10.
Yeah, I turned 10 in November.
Got it.
I'm sorry, I turned 11 in November. I was 10 that summer. And, you just think, who wouldn't want to fly airplanes? But, and we had, the local airport was Islip MacArthur, International Airport, I guess. And I was, I would ride my bike 5 miles to go to the airport and watch, planes take off and land. And the kid with his face pressed up against the chain link fence going oh, I'd love to do that. But
so did you tell yourself after watching Top Gun for the first time, I'm going to do that?
So I did, in a very uninformed way, in the sense of that is something that I would like to do. But, everybody probably has an uncle or a cousin or the family friend who's had some military experience. And oh, dude, those are officers, you're never going to be an officer. Oh, okay. So I didn't know anything about how the military worked. We didn't have a local base. I had nobody in my family. Nobody graduated college in my family. So it was very foreign to me. So I graduated high school early. I decided I have to change the direction of my life. So I'm a junior in high school. I'm that's it. I'm going to get myself squared away, read, I'm going to study, try to academically turn myself around, really dive hard into this, again, the one academic thing I was good at, which was taking pictures in school. So I took that art class, got an A. And then I was that's it. I'm going to double down my senior year, and I'm going to graduate high school early. So all I took were the core classes, and you were able to kind of double up on math and English to get out of school early. So I graduated. So I turned 17 in November, and I graduated before Christmas. And my plan was to go to art school. And so I rode my bike to the community college, and I took my placement exams, and I was proud of myself, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go to college, and I was going to begin my communications degree, and that's it. January of 1993, I was going to be a college student, which I'd vetted through my dad, like, hey, this is like my plan. And he was like, all right. And I'd been working, I always had like 2 jobs. So when I was a senior, I had 3 jobs plus cramming through school. And the night before my first Monday morning, 8:30 class, my dad I'll never forget, sat down on the side of my bed. He goes, I know you're supposed to start college tomorrow, but I'm not paying for it. So you have 3 options. 1, you can start paying rent. 2, you can get a scholarship and go to school, because again, I'm not paying for school. Or 3, you can join the military. So I went, okay, full-time job and pay rent. Like, that's what I'm going to do, because I'm not joining the military, right? And 3 months into working full-time at the mall, well, they wouldn't give me full-time. They gave me like 34 hours a week, because they didn't want to give me benefits and all that kind of good stuff, right? And I'm like, that's it. I'm going to save, and then I'm going to go to school in the fall. And in about March, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And, I bump into my friend. This story happens multiple times. Bump into friends that would be like, dude, I thought you were going to college. And I'm like stocking shelves at the Gap. And I'm like, I am, once I save up money to get there. And so I just like, all right, so what do I want to do? So I pulled out, and now dating myself, of course, the phone book, and I called the Air Force recruiter, and I said, okay, what do I need to do to be a pilot? And the guy was so dialed in on his sales pitch. He just knew. He goes, you want to fly jets? Not a problem. Just come on down with your 4-year degree, and we'll send you off to officer school, and you'll go fly jets. I was like, oh, well, I just graduated high school. I don't have a 4-year degree. He's like, well, I'm sure your parents have saved up like $130,000, $150,000. They'll send you to school. When you come back in 4 years, just bring me that degree. We'll get you signed up to go fly jets. I'm like, oh, my parents did not save any money. We don't have money for me to go to school. It's like, all right, well, then you just need to enlist, because, we'll give you a job, we'll train you, you'll get the GI Bill. And then in 4 years, people do it all the time. They'll get their degree and then they'll go. And, lo and behold, I'm like, all right, sign me up. And so in March, I did the delayed enlistment program. And then I got into the first boot camp, that I could get into, which was July 19th of 1993. And of course, in that time, I still, I was 17, Chris. I didn't have a driver's license, because in New York, you get your driver's license at 16, and you get your junior license at 17 if you take driver's ed.
Sure.
Which, again, we did not have money to pay for me to go to driver's ed. So I had my junior driver's license, which meant I could go to drive to work or school. I wasn't going to school, and I didn't have a car either. So here I am, graduated high school, riding my bike, like 5 miles each way to the mall, to not be sweaty in my Gap clothes and try to look like a cool preppy kid, right? And then earn money for school. And, but because I had my junior driver's license, my parents' car insurance went up. So now I had a bill for something that I didn't even get to use, right? So I was just already in this churn, and I was like, I've got to take action, change my life. I have to lead my life and do what it is that I'm going to do. Because if I just exist or go with the status quo, I could project what my life was going to be in 50 years. I was seeing it, I was living it, and I knew that I just wanted to turn the page and do something totally different. So that's when I enlisted in the Air Force. I was true a little bit to, some of the things that I liked, which was photography and video and all that kind of stuff. So I got to go to school. The Air Force taught me how to repair these giant cameras, as big as the chairs that we're sitting in. And it was one of those life-changing events for me, because I just always thought, I didn't have, and I really want to have this caveat. I'm not close with my dad. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't work. But I don't begrudge him for a thing. Amazing. Because that is what made me who I am, right? If I didn't have some of these challenges to get through, or, the mindset, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did. So, I have found gratitude in those things because it put me in action. And if I didn't have those challenges to be put into action, I wouldn't be doing any of the things that I got to do.
So speaking of action, right? So you get in the you get in the Air Force, you're repairing the cameras, and then what happens between repairing cameras in the Air Force and being in an F-16? Like, there seems to be a lot of steps and all of that. I mean, and this is where I get so amped up about you, John, because the one thing that I can say, and I've said it to you, that you demonstrate more than anyone else I've ever met is action, right? And I think the story you just told was all of those hard years of learning to 17 to then the action that you started to see success with, but you never stop. And you still haven't stopped. You know, how many Thunderbird pilots retire and they go off and become speakers and they carry around the helmet and do that thing, right? But you never stop. You're still flying jets.
Yeah.
Like, so take us through that time in the Air Force and, you know, even percentage wise, what is it? What's your percentage chance of becoming a Thunderbird pilot? Like,
well, I think since 1953, I think I was like the 27th person to hold the number 2 position. So it's pretty, it's been thousands and thousands of pilots and only, a few people holding that position. So 2 things. I think the fact that I was just focused on the fact that, like, again, when you're 17 and you're like, oh, you're going to go, I was a surfer, I had long hair, all this stuff. Like, oh, dude, you're going to be a conformist. Yeah. Oh, you're going to join the military. They're going to tell you what to do. And I was like, no, I don't want to lose that part of myself. I'm going to chart my own trajectory. I'm going to pilot my life. Right. So, but I had that mindset, number one. But then the other part of your question is I was really lucky. My office that I worked in, so I get stationed, my first duty station after going through my camera school, right, is Naval Air Station Keflavik, Iceland. You go, man. And I showed up there in March and it was like 22 and a half hours of dark and cold and windy and snowy, and you got issued this parka with like reflective lanyards that would fly, like, in case you because get 45 knots of wind, it'll blow you over into a snowbank, and if you get stuck in there, like, maybe someone will see this like tether. I mean, literally this tether that you are required to have off your jacket. So maybe that's blowing in the breeze when you're stuck in the 22 hours of darkness. But I showed up to an office that was about the size of the impact factory, literally, on the flight line to work on cameras on jets. And there were 3 sergeants there. And like the highest ranking sergeant was working on his master's degree. The middle sergeant was just finishing his bachelor's degree, and the other guy just did his associate's degree. And the reason why I came in, which many people come in the military, is because they want the GI Bill, the school benefits, right? It's one of the greatest gifts that we can give is an education and receive an education. So I was like, holy cow, I landed, like, this was a godsend for me to be in this office. And they're like, we don't have a whole lot of work because our system is actually pretty reliable. So you're interested in college? And I'm like, yes, that's the reason why I'm here. They're like, great. But the Air Force had this weird policy that, like, you go through the school and then you have like 3 months of on-the-job training. And then I had like 6 months of more. It's almost like a correspondence course. And then to take the test, it was like at least 9 months before they would allow me to take a college class. And thank God I had this boss who was like, I'm going to apply for a waiver for you to allow you to take
stealing bases, baby.
Oh my God. It was, so spring rolls around and I story of my life on a bicycle. So I get this bike and I pedal across the base to English 101. And it was like the greatest thing ever. And I was just hooked on the fact that my day job was working on something that I liked. And then my side hustle, if you will, was going to college at night, which is something that not only did I want to do, but I know I needed to do it. It was this, now we call it self-improvement, but weren't really thinking through that lens then. So it was just then being focused on those things. But now I'm around jets, and now I'm understanding how this works. And just to show you how ignorant I was about the entire process, I'm graduated from basic training, the standard, they shave your head, all that stuff. And I go off to my technical school, learning the systems. And I'm in the BX, which is like the little Walmart on base, buying toothpaste or whatever. And I see these young people my age, but they're in, this full service dress with this really cool looking rank on their shoulders. I'm like, oh wow, it's just like an international, whatever. And I asked my buddy, I'm like, who are those guys? I mean, they just looked so crisp, so squared away. They're like, they are United States Air Force Academy cadets. And I'm like, what's the academy? Like, oh, it's like a college for the Air Force. And then when you graduate, you become an officer, and like half those guys go to pilot training. I'm like, God bless it, right? Yeah. But I mean, with there was no way I didn't even know what the academy was, let alone, I mean, it's so competitive. And a friend of mine who's I just really look up to Fifi Nicole Malachowski, incredible speaker, first female Thunderbird pilot. But, when you hear her story, like she knew she wanted to do this and she was 5. She had legacy, I think her grandfather was an officer in the Air Force, and like she really knew all of the process. And like, I hear her story. I'm like, God, that was like my dream, I mean, and I just think it's incredible. And I'm so grateful for folks that have that mentorship early on. Because if you meet somebody that graduates from any of the service academies, like they have their crap together from like the time they're 10 years old, right? Because you have to have like a congressional, recommendation from like a senator or congressman to even get your application to the front door. And so I admire those folks because they just had it dialed in so early when I totally didn't. Right? So I really, really admire the folks that have accomplished that. So, now I'm just kind of grinding away, semester by semester, taking one class, taking 2 classes, that type of thing, until I start getting the attention, so I after a year, I was in Iceland, I moved to Valdosta, to Moody Air Force Base in Georgia, which was just a great place for me, again, because I let my intentions be known. We had a couple folks that were, taking some classes here and there. And then...
And those intentions being, I'm going to be a pilot.
Well, that I'm going to finish my degree.
Okay.
And, I just had this mindset of like, I came in to get a degree, not to just be a career enlisted person. Sure. Not that there's anything, amazing. I would love to do 30 years and, be an E9 chief in the Air Force. But I just, at the time when I was, 18 now, I'm like, I know that I came here for school. But I also excelled at my job. So I was, now getting rewarded for, I'm like, you're the airman of the month, you're the airman of the quarter. I was the airman of the year, at the base. And so once I started receiving some positive feedback, and I was just really in this mode of just doing the thing, that's when I started to get some attention. And at a different supervisor say, hey, have you ever thought about going to, becoming an officer or whatever? And, I still, and it wasn't imposter syndrome. It was just, I didn't know that I could physically the steps to do it. So, and this is where brand new guy to the base, right? As I did this, so kind of rewinding and going back and thinking about it. So I'm at like the safety briefing, and then the chief master sergeant of the base, he's the highest ranking enlisted guy, and his job is to take care, at the time they called him the senior enlisted advisor. Now they call him the command chief. But so he's like, my job is to take care of all of you enlisted folks and whatever you need. So, I have an open door. If you ever want to, have a question, come over. So right after the briefing, I had lunch for an hour. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to go walk and find this guy's office. And I knocked on his door, and like the secretary was just kind of blown. Anyway, I'm a young kid, had one stripe, and she's like, can I help you? I'm like, yeah, I'm here to see the chief. She's like, okay. Do you have an appointment? I was like, no, but I was just at his briefing, and he said if we had any questions, we could just come over and ask him. So I'm here. And she could just tell that I was just like this kind of happy-go-lucky, gullible, inexperienced, 18-year-old. And she kind of like snickered. She's like, I'll be right back.
Oh my God.
And so thank God for this woman, because she leans her head into the chief's office. She goes, young airman out here that was just at your briefing and said, you know, that you could answer his questions if he came over. She's kind of like trying to really hold it back. And Chief Master Sergeant Gerald Murray, who became the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. So he was in charge of all the enlisted people for all the, I mean, talk about mentor, right? And that again, I'm really leading up to answering your question, mentorship, because I didn't know what it was to be a mentee, but I was like, I know I need to go ask people that know what's going on and get their guidance. And heck, I'm going to start from the top, right? So, and he said, you know, son, can I help you? And I'm like, yeah, Chief, I was just at your briefing and it was like really great. You know, it was like, it was watching a motivational speaker, right? I just saw your thing, and I want to be a fighter pilot. I want to learn how to be a fighter pilot. And he's like,
you're 18.
I was 18. And he goes, okay, I don't know how to be a fighter pilot, but I know some guys that do know how to be a fighter pilot. So like, I'm in the command building of the base. I mean, there's literally like one building in the middle of like the roundabout, basically, you know, in the center of the giant flagpole, the whole thing. And so he leans his head in and he goes, hey, boss, you busy? And Colonel Billy Deal says, no, Chief, what's up? He goes, well, I got this young man out here who wants to be a fighter pilot. I told him I don't know anything about being a fighter pilot, but I know that you do, so I'm going to hand him off to you. He goes, all right, got it. And so I talked to Colonel Billy Deal, who's like a legend in the F-4 and the F-16. And he's like, yeah, you know, being a fighter pilot, you know, this is great. You know, it's an awesome career. If this is what you want to do, we'll help you. And so then he goes, come with me. And then we go to the third door, and it is a one-star general, L.D. Johnston, who is another legend in the F-4 and the F-16, fighter weapons school graduate and instructor. He was the commandant of the weapons school. He then became the base commander where the weapons school was at Nellis Air Force Base. And he's like, hey, sir, we got this guy who wants to be a fighter pilot. He goes, all right. And so these guys became like, you know, senior mentors. I wasn't like talking to these guys every week, but, you know, it was just kind of throwing it out there, having some intention.
Go for it.
And kind of like telling my friends back in high school, like, I'm graduating early so I can go to college, that, hey, I'm going to go be a fighter pilot now. And then, yeah, I think once you get it out there and there's a level of accountability from the world, because now there's an expectation. And I think when you admit to yourself that you're committing to doing something and you tell somebody else, now you're like, well, I got to put up or shut up. So ego starts to kick in a little bit there.
And what an amazing thing that you just demonstrated there with your ability to take action. So much of it is accountability, right? Like, I mean, even take this, right? You said, yep, Chris, I'm going to be there. We're going to do this. I'm like, all right, let's go. Right. And I don't even know how long ago that was, but I think that's, you know, one of the things I see in people is this lack of ability to take action. I mean, we were just, I just did an amazing interview with a friend of mine, Croy, and he was talking about how so many of us sit on the fence. It was actually off of that I'm like, oh my God, John Baum. And I'm not going to call you Slick because I like John Baum better. John Baum, this is it. Your whole thing is action. And like, you know, that accountability thing is so important, right? Even if at some point that dream of you being a fighter pilot dies, right? Like, you're marching towards something, then you come up with a new dream, right? Like, once again, what I love about this story is not only do you go all the way, but you still haven't stopped. So, all right, keep going.
Yeah. So at that point now, I'm starting to think about scholarship applications and those types of things. So, like I said, and I was also doing the work, being an airman, you know, perfect uniform, perfect shiny boots, you know, haircut tighter than Chris Tuff, the whole 9 yards.
I don't know.
I mean, you look pretty good there. Now, again, there was that bit of recognition, but, you know, the Air Force has to, especially when you're enlisted, they go, man, you know, this is a big promotion. You know, you're going to like skyrocket through the ranks. And you have to, you know, really prove to them that you're up for it.
I mean, I don't even want to know how many tests are involved.
It was a lot.
I'd freak out at just the first one. I'd fail.
Well, you know, it's not only the academic test, but there's a lot of, you know,
I'd fail those ones too.
Well, it's just it's personal politics, right? Where you say, hey,
I'm okay with that.
You're good with that one. But you know, hey, we've got this young person who thinks that they're going to be like outranking a guy who's been like just for those that don't understand military, which I understand a lot, some people do and a lot of people don't in our country.
I've seen Top Gun.
Okay. So, but there's two.
I watched Masters of the Air too. Okay. Keep going.
Well, there's two sides of the Air Force. You have the enlisted corps, which is like 84% of the Air Force, or the in the Air Force specifically. I know these numbers, but they are your proverbial 18-year-old like me that calls a recruiter, signs up, they enlist, and they re-up for 4 years and 4 years and 4 years. Just like you see in the movies. And then there's the other 16% of the Air Force that are the officers that at a minimum have a 4-year degree. And so the difference, it's like the enlisted folks are the backbone, the core of the military. Your tradesmen, and there's of course extremely smart people with many degrees and all that kind of stuff. But historically and traditionally, it's your tradesmen, and then the officers are kind of like I don't know if this is PC or I was like, the blue collar jobs versus the white collar jobs, right? And
Leadership.
so all the officers are, minimum 4-year degree, the doctors, the lawyers, the pilots, and all these things. And, so Chief Murray, like a 36-year chief, has to salute a brand new second lieutenant walking down the sidewalk, a 22-year-old that just graduates the academy or ROTC or whatever it is, right? They have zero experience. The chief has all of the experience for many years.
Wild.
But that's just the way the structure works. So when you're in the system and you go, I'm going to jump out of my giant tribe, and I think I'm going to be with those folks over there, which, from a life society standpoint, right? It's like, hey, I'm from a family of construction workers and tin knockers, right?
Sure.
Like I'm going to now go with the collegiate preppy, folks that have their lives together, Letterman sport. All right, I got to tell you the story. So just to put all of this into context, Chris, so I go through all the things and I get sponsored, if you will, to like the commanders has to like interview you and take interest in you, and they watch you for like a year, and then they build this package for you to send you up for a scholarship, and then you meet a board, and it's all these, so now I'm just, I could be like the quote, the ace of the base, at Moody Air Force Base here in Georgia, but there's an ace of the base, enlisted kid at every base, right? And so now they go, we have 20 scholarship opportunities for these enlisted folks this year, and the board's going to be held on June 1st. So get your packages in by, March 1st. So then it's like, you got to telegraph this stuff. It's like, you have to have a crystal ball. Like September, I have to start putting my package together to have everything vetted and approved through the base so I can go for the March deadline for the June board to be released for September college, right? Like, and that's the Air Force, in a lot of people, I've heard people say like, oh, it's not really like that. It's not super competitive. And I raise the BS flag because like when you're in pilot training, there's 20 people in your pilot training class. There's a number 1 and there's a number 20 and there's a 16, 17. I mean, you are rank ordered all the time.
Oh my gosh.
So to say that our lives as fighter pilots is not competitive or the Air Force isn't competitive, BS. It's massively competitive. So, but I'll tell you the first day of pilot training, and it's a long story how we got there, but essentially the whole pilot training wing got in trouble, and it was my class's first day, and we show up and like the wing commander who's like in charge of the whole pilot training program is like super pissed off. He gets all the students in there. So every 6 weeks a class graduates. So there's like 20 students in a class. So it's like 200 plus 220 pilots a year get cranked out. So everybody's in kind of a little bit of a different phase. So we're starting as a class graduates, if you will, and then you have the myriad in between. So we have all the student, like no one's flying that morning. And we're all in this auditorium. It's like a big movie theater. And the wing commander is pissed because one of the students, they pulled up to the gate, typical, like it was kind of like, just graduated college. There's like 3 dudes in a car. And one guy's like, oh crap, I forgot my ID card. And like the gate guard's like, oh, sorry, I can't let you in without your ID. So the car turns around and, they drop the one guy because they didn't have time to go home, get his wallet and come back. And so now all of a sudden, like there's the same car with now 2 people in it. And they flash their IDs and they go through. Well, the third guy jumped the fence, which is like totally illegal to do, even if you're in the military. And of course, the security forces, guards are like, dude, we're onto these clowns. And so they arrest the dude as they go to pick him up around the corner. And so this like happened at like, 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning at the like first brief. So like we're supposed to show up for like the 7:30 briefing. It's like everybody in the auditorium. And so the wing commander, it's like, all right, you idiots, stand up if you are the valedictorian of your high school. And like 7 people stand up. Stand up if you are. And so I'm in an international program. I went to Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training. So we've got all the NATO students there as well. So there's literally like aristocracy and like royalty people there, sure. Right? I mean, stand up if you went to your country's Air Force Academy, and like half the room stands up. You know, stand up if you were an Eagle Scout. Stand up, you know. At the end of this exercise, I'm like, dude, I am the only person still sitting. And thank God for me that he's finally like, all right, enough. Everybody sit down. But to me, that was just such an impactful moment in the sense of like, in one way, I'm amongst a group of people that I have no business being there other than the fact that I worked my ass off to be there. And again, not imposter syndrome. I wasn't faking it. They weren't going to find something out about me. I was just like, dude, get me in a jet. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
You know, now, you know, call it, it's not jealousy for me. It's truly admiration. Like, dude, do I wish, you know, stand up if your father is a general officer and you're, you know, like people are standing up, their dads are like they grew up with this stuff. Right. I mean, I would have loved to have that life growing up. I love the life that I had growing up as well. Again, like I said, I'm grateful for all of that, but it's just really funny when you, especially something that's so regimented like the military and this, you know, this, I mean, we're the modern day knights, you know, fighter pilots. I mean, that's
so how long did it take you to go from there to flying an F-16 or?
Yeah. So I apologize. I'll fast forward.
No,
right.
It's
but
good.
No. So, so I graduated high school. I was a class of 93. And essentially it took me 6 years to do the time that I was in my enlisted years in the Air Force, get out, go to ROTC, and earn my commission. So 1999 is when I commissioned. So 6 years. But then luckily I caught myself up academically because I almost had my master's degree when I commissioned because I just grinded through school at night. And so I was like, for me, I didn't want years lost, right? I was like, well, if I went traditionally to college, university, and I did a 4-year degree and I did a master's, I would have graduated with my master's in 1999. So that's basically where I was at when I commissioned.
Unbelievable, dude.
So
take me to those moments where not only did you obviously start flying the jets, but then you got into the Thunderbirds, right? Like, what is that process? Well,
I'll tell you what it's like for many people. And then I'll tell you what it's like for me, because I have the one-off, completely unique story. That, you know, I'm the one Thunderbird who never applied for the team.
Are you serious?
So, you know, you go, you know, off. You got to fly a fighter, so you go through pilot training. It's a year long. You get track selected again. You know, there's a number 1, there's a number 20. You know, depending on how that shakes out, you get selected to go to the fighter track, and then you get a pointy nose jet. You go fly that for an assignment or 2, and then you normally apply. And the thing with the Thunderbirds, I mean, you're representing the entire Air Force. I mean, not only representing the Air Force, you're representing America. I mean, when I was on the Thunderbirds in 2009, we did an Asia tour. And when you're flying a red, white, and blue airplane, you know, with an American flag on the side, you're not just representing the Air Force, you're representing the entire country, which is just massively incredible for me just to get that opportunity. But so folks, you know, typically go through and it's 1 year out. They go, okay, we are accepting applications this year for next year's team. So, but then you got to prep everybody. And, you know, once you signal that to your leadership, you know, you kind of say like, hey, I want to focus on not tactically flying the airplane, which is, you know, frankly, what the jets are meant to do. You're supposed to go out there and dogfight people and drop bombs or whatever it is that your mission is. And I want to put my energy into, you know, I'm being, you know, a weapons school guy. I'm like, to be a show pony. You know, I want to, you know, like I've shared my music analogy with you before. You know, when you're like, so I went through, let me just back up. So I went through, I was flying. I wanted to go to weapons school because I saw Top Gun and, you know, those guys were badass, and that's what I wanted to do because that's like the PhD school for fighter pilots.
Right.
Like literally the Air Force has been trying to get this accreditation so that when you graduate the weapons school that you get your PhD, because it is that intense of a school. It's not 6 weeks like the Navy. It's a totally different school. It's very academic. You're writing research papers and doing that kind of stuff, along with all the flying.
Oh my God.
So I get picked up for weapons school. I go through weapons school. I graduate. Then I go back to the squadron, if you will. I do that. And then at graduation, I got invited to be an instructor. So I knew I was going back to Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico to be the squadron patch, as we call it. But I knew, as soon as that assignment was over, I was going back to Nellis to teach. So then I went through that upgrade, which is like going through weapons school all over again, but now through a different lens of, can you teach all the stuff to the students? And so I was doing that, and I had a couple of friends that were applying for the Thunderbirds and stuff like that. And now for me, with my background, Thunderbirds, the representation, at the time it was recruit, retain, and represent. Those were the three, kind of mission segments of what you did as a Thunderbird. And, I kind of signaled that I was interested in being on the team, but it was like, to ask your leadership when they've invested the millions and millions and millions of dollars to become a weapons school instructor, it was like a faux pas to say, like, hey Dad, I want to totally change directions. Right. So, and then, you kind of get branded as like, oh man, the guy doesn't want to focus on tactics anymore. He wants to go, fly with Thunderbirds. But I had a couple friends, Fifi was somebody that I knew. And I was on the base, and they had some trauma on the team. They had somebody that they hired through the normal application process. So it's 1 year, out, you do the application process. There's like 70 people every year that apply. They pick like 12 to come out for like an in-person interview. They travel for a weekend. They interact with the team, and then after those 12, they whittle it down to 6, and then they, a couple months later, they bring them back out on the road, do all the interviews, and then they pick 3. Is how that works. Well, I was like, well, maybe, I don't know if I could even, my timing, maybe in 2 years, I could even think about applying, if it's even something I could do. Well, I get a phone call. They're like, did you say that you were interested in being a Thunderbird? I'm like, well, I mean, I know I'm in this role and I want to be great at being a weapons school instructor, but given the opportunity, absolutely. They're like, well, you're basically going to be a Thunderbird. So,
no way.
So, luckily, again, I had amazing leadership. Just retired General Leonard, who was my squadron commander at the time. He's like, slick. When your leadership asks you to be a Thunderbird, you don't think about it. You just do it. So at the time, I was working in the F-35 program, and that was a really amazing experience. I again, signaling intention. When I showed up as a brand new instructor, and I salute in, and I talked to General. At the time, it was Lieutenant Colonel Leonard, Tank Leonard, awesome guy. And he's like, what do you want to do? I'm like, I want to fly the F-35. He was like, and this thing was like a couple years off. He's like, well, okay, let me think about that. So a couple months later, the Air Force needed, to start building the initial cadre of what it was going to be like to go fly the simulators and figure this whole thing out and start developing tactics, techniques, and procedures to employ this airplane. So he goes, dude, I have a job for you. You're going to now be the lead F-35 tactics development team lead for Nellis. You're for the Air Force, really, because that's Nellis is where you develop that stuff. He's like, you get one instructor from every division of the fighter side. So like one F-15E guy, one it was amazing. A-10 guy, and so we would go to Lockheed Martin once a month for a week and fly the F-35 sim. So I had applied to be the initial cadre, and I went, it's all this, but this ranking thing, right? It never goes away. So I was ranked number 1 of 10 applicants from Nellis Air Force Base as the tactics development team lead to go be the initial group to go fly the jet. And I was going to move to Eglin Air Force Base, Panhandle, not the best surfing in the world, but you're right by the beach. I was like, it's going to be awesome. And so on Christmas Eve, I got the phone call, and I told you the thing that where Tank had said that was after, hey, when somebody asked you to do this. But on Christmas Eve, I got called into the wing commander's office, General Handy, and he's can you be at my office at 8:30? And it was literally Christmas Eve in 2008. And I'm like, yes. Do I need to be in my service dress? He's like, no. I was like, great, because that meant Like, he's like, flight suit's fine. I'm like, that's how I knew I wasn't in trouble. Right? If I could show up just like in my flying gear, like that's, I'm good to go. I'm not
Totally.
not in trouble. And so I report in, he goes, all right. He goes, slick dude, the results are out for the F-35 initial cadre board. You're going to do very well on the board. You're going to come out as an alternate. But on Monday, when we go flying after the new year, you're going to fly with the Thunderbirds.
Oh,
and I thought this was a total joke from my squadron mates. Like, oh, Slick wants to go fly the newest jet in the Air Force. And, I'm like, I figured they were like cameras set up. Yeah. This is like the candid camera thing. Like, I'm getting punked, right? I'm like, oh, sir. And like, you don't curse in front of generals, so
Sure.
you can bleep this out. But I'm like, yeah, f***ing right, sir.
Yeah,
Ha ha.
awesome.
And I'm ready to be like, I'm just kidding, Slick. You're going to the F-35. He's like, no, I'm serious. He's like, when the list comes out, you're going to come out as an alternate. But we need you to go fly with the Thunderbirds. They couldn't go back and, hey, who applied, and bring them out and all this stuff. I was an instructor flying, the newest version of the F-16 that we had, called the Block 52. The Air Force Thunderbirds had just transitioned to Block 52. So they're like, we need an instructor who knows the jet to come over. They're doing a new routine, all this stuff. And they unfortunately were letting a guy go off the team. And they're like, we need you to come in. And the training season for the Thunderbirds starts like the first week of November and goes until the first week of March. So it's almost 6 months long, flying twice a day, every day, 97 ride upgrade program. And so I just jumped into this thing on January 5th of 2009, and we came together to fly the Super Bowl in February. So,
and how long were you doing that?
So it's a 2-year gig. Always a 2-year gig. I think maybe now they might have changed things where they might do a 3-year gig for one position.
Is it nerve-wracking when you're flying a plane that's worth, like, I get worried, like, driving my friends, like, Mercedes, never mind does that even cross your mind?
Not the value, I'll be honest with you. I mean, when you're kind of like...
Because, what does a plane like that cost?
It's like $33 million in today's dollars. But, I think a new one was more than that. Like a Block 70 is like, $50 million or something like that.
Sure.
It's not necessarily... you understand the gravity of it, but I think really the God's honest truth is that jet can kill you. Mm-hmm. That thing can turn so tight, it'll knock you out in a couple. You could lay on the G, it'll suck all the blood out of your brain, you pass out and you crash. So, and we have lost, and I don't mean to say that flippantly, we've lost a lot of F-16 pilots due to G-induced loss of consciousness, G-lock, and they showed that in Top Gun 2 pretty well. And then controlled flight into terrain, CFIT, which is crashing into the ground. So you have a G-lock followed by CFIT, and it's all over. So the airplane can hurt you for sure. And then with the Thunderbird, you're flying at just a ridiculously fast speed and so close to one another. It's like, and I'll show you pictures. I mean, and they're doing it now. So they were doing it and they stopped doing it. They kind of for safety, sometimes they'll, hey, we need to spread it out. We can move it back in. But we were flying with 18 inches of wingtip overlap, going 450 knots, like every day, no problem. Or we would go into this trail position, Chris, and I would be looking up, and like where the ceiling fan is the burner can of the number one jet. Then I was number 2 flying right underneath, and we'd be going into a vertical maneuver, which was one of my favorite maneuvers.
And that's all by feel? Like you're doing it all by feel?
All by feel. I just hand-eye coordination. You're just looking, seeing. And the other thing that's really neat, and we don't really think I've articulated it this way, but it's also by sound, because we're not flying like normal fighter pilots. It's like, they rock you in, you see your flight lead rock their wings. They go, oh, that means they want me to fly closer. And then you go, whoosh, and you fly at like 3 feet of wingtip separation. And, there's reasons why you do that, bad weather or whatever. Like I was explaining to Carter, hey, we have to get through the weather. That's a real reason why, fighter pilots fly formation. You have a bad instrument or something, you're above the weather, somebody can rejoin on you and get you through the weather so you can land safe. That's how like really formation started. You're flying ridiculously close. And when you're flying in a tactical, if a guy starts to turn, and they have some wingman consideration, but you just follow them through the turn. with the Thunderbirds, we're really proactive, really on any jet team. With, like you mentioned the Ghost Squadron before. I mean, we've taken a lot of the lessons learned. We have, another Thunderbird, a good, really close friend of mine flying on the team as well. And so we've taken a lot of lessons learned from what we did on the Thunderbirds to execute this team really well. But the lead will almost like sing on the radio, because you get just so bonded as a team that when you hear the person's voice, and so they'll you'll go into a loop and they'll kind of sing it. They'll go right on into 4.
No
and as
way.
they're singing it, the intonation in their voice and every lead is different. So you learn how they do it, but it's how they're doing the G onset and how you're pulling back on the stick to match it, to make it really smooth. Now you could do that without them talking, but now you're just purely reacting versus having this
like a
connection,
conductor.
this authentic connection with your lead there, and it just makes it smooth. So you're looking, but you're also listening, and you're following the tone of the voice on and how you fly. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, so I think one of the things that really differentiates you from a lot of ex-Thunderbirds is that you never stop. Right. And I have so much admiration and respect for your ability, John, to take action. And so, what you're able to build and sell, not many people make it to the Thunderbirds and then are able in the private world build and sell a company for a significant exit. Right. And it's like you never stop. Right. And I think that is one of the recipes for joy. I think lives in progress and action.
Absolutely.
And I think there's so much that so many people have already learned from you, but are going to learn from you with that kind of as that backbone. So talk about just in your day to day, as you obviously have had a massively successful exit with a private company, but then also what you're doing with Polaris. Like, what are some of those kind of key elements that you think?
Yeah. So just to unpack a couple things, I had a group of friends leaving the Thunder, when I was leaving the Thunderbirds, and my friend Sean that I mentioned, he's like a brother. We were able to help form a civilian jet team. And in that, we took a lot of what we already knew and, civilianized it. Right, because some things just don't
Had anyone
work.
ever done that before?
There have been some other teams, but just not on the scale in which we did it.
Yeah.
And during that was just purely like, we want to fly, we want to give back to the community. We were supporting the Make-A-Wish Foundation at the time, so it was just great to go to these different air shows and host Wish Kids.
Totally.
Right, and we're just living
Chris
the dream.
Tuff, it's fine.
And Chris Tuff.
Yeah.
But we really realized that we're like, man, we are doing the same thing that the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels do every weekend for like a tenth of the cost and like a tenth of the manpower. And it was like our proof of concept to when, my buddy Sean was like, dude, we could do like what we call Red Air, like the scrimmage team. So halfway through our first show season in August, we had like the initial, concept of like what a business could look like using way to reliable X-fighter aircraft, and to put them on contract with the military. And so 5 of us co-founded this company.
So awesome.
With our CEO just being absolutely incredible business guy and pilot, and true visionary. I mean, a real just amazing person. And so we just started building this company, and we incorporated in November of 2011. And then we went through, and it was truly the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. And, we had this mindset, because when we kind of did like an unsolicited proposal and did some things, like the Air Force was like, no, we don't want it. The Navy had done a little bit of work with contract air services, but the Air Force really hadn't done it. And we were trying to do it in a totally different way. Like if you saw the original Top Gun, where, the students are going out and they're dogfighting for points so they can like earn enough points to graduate. Right.
Yep.
And although it's not like point system, I mean, you have to get through like the syllabus, and you win, right, by passing the ride. If you don't win, you don't pass the ride. You have to do the ride over again until you win. So there's just kind of like a point system. And so when I was an instructor at the weapons school, actually when I was a student, I almost didn't my class, we almost didn't graduate because we didn't have enough support assets within our military to provide the bad guys. So you have somebody to go dogfight against. And then when I was teaching at the weapons school, I was in charge of the largest phase of the weapons school, which just had the most red air. And we almost didn't graduate a class because we couldn't get them through that phase because we didn't have enough folks to come out and support us. So this kind of like idea of red air for hire, was a great concept. We proved that we could be a team that traveled and was on the road doing what, a military unit already has done. So that was our proof of concept. The Air Force, a lot of people said no a lot. And then in 2015, we got our first, kind of small contract. And by 2016, we were getting a bigger contract. And by 2017, we had like 2018 real contracts. And, it was a real massive, we had the largest privately owned Air Force in the world. It's like over 150 jets. We had, compared to other countries' Air Forces, I think we had the 14th largest Air Force in the world. Bigger than Canada. Yeah. It's like crazy. But, and so then after that, we were able to exit that business and, continue to do other things. And, it's funny that you mentioned like the Thunderbird thing. And I had said this when I was on the team. I'm like, man, I don't want to be one of those people where like, my line look, or if my life was a graph, right, it would like peak out at being a Thunderbird and then just kind of like die off from there. I just wanted like this 45 up and to the right, and just have these touch points along the way. And, I got to be enlisted and then I got to graduate college and go through flight school and get an F-16 and go to weapons school, teach at the weapons school, be a Thunderbird, be an Air Force fellow, get a second master's degree in communication, which is the whole reason why I joined the Air Force, right? And then, I wanted to move to Hawaii and I wanted to fly a new airplane in the Air Force. So I made the next rank full colonel. I don't know if I've never told you the story. Because we were building this company and I was still in the Air Force. So
but why you've never told me this story? Here's what's so interesting. The reason you've never told me that story is so much of our conversations are focused on where you're going. Right. And like, how amazing is that? Like, just listen to what you've talked about on this podcast. And yet all of our interaction has been focused on what's next.
Yeah.
Right. And what a great example of really, I guess, where you're going. Right. And this action orientation that you have that so many, I think, can learn from. So keep going.
Yeah, no. And it was the action piece because originally leaving the Thunderbirds, I got this 3-year fellowship, which was like this mondo deal in the Air Force because I had 116 days of vacation. And then the Air Force was still giving me 2.5 days of vacation per month. And because I was a Thunderbird, normally you have what we call it, use or lose, 60 days. But we had a special waiver because we couldn't take leave for like the 3 years that we were building up to and then training our replacements. So you're on the road, doing the job for 2 years, but there's like 6 months before, 6 months after. It's like a 3-year total commitment. So you can't take leave for 3 years really. And so I had 116 days leave. They're giving me this leave and we're forming this new jet team. So I'm like, I want to get like this really cool fellowship because I needed a break from the Air Force. And I just, I wanted to still fly. I was going back to school, getting a second master's in communication, which is, again, that full circle thing. And then we form our company. And now I just signed a 3-year contract with the Air Force. And they're like, we need to get out. And I'm like, crap, I can't get out. So the only thing I could do is try to transition to like the Guard or Reserve. But since I had this fresh 3-year contract, they would only let you out in your last year. So I'm like, authentic connection with all these cool people, like, this, that. So I meet this, I was trying to go to the Pennsylvania Air National Guard and it didn't work out. And so this guy goes to Hawaii and I get a call out of the blue and he goes, dude, I was really impressed with your interview when you tried to come to PA. It really sinks that didn't work out. But now since you have like less than a year left, you're like, it's an automatic. You want to come over to the Hawaii Guard. The position that I'm hiring you for is an 06 position. You have to interview for it and do all this stuff. And then you're going to move to Hawaii. You're going to be a group commander. You're going to pin on 06, which is the next rank. But for me and my timeline, it was like 5 years early. And you're going to get to fly the F-22 Raptor. And I'm like, yeah. And so I do the interview process, I do all this stuff, and I make it. I'm like, they're like, dude, you'll pin on 1 May, and all this stuff. But we had finally had our first contract. And this is where I got with my business partners and, my CEO. I was like, I've been trying to get out so that I, wasn't an active duty Air Force officer anymore. But now I'm at like, was just hitting my 20. I'm like, but check this out. I just got this thing. It's pretty epic assignment. Like, should I turn it down? Like, is our business real? Right. And my buddy's like, dude, our business is real. You should turn it down. And I was like, all right. And I did. And thank God I did. But, those opportunities, Chris, they don't just land in your lap, right? We talk about luck and making your own luck and all these things. And Naval talks about this on his podcast. He's like, there's 4 kinds of luck, and he kind of goes through it. But, it's like if you become an expert scuba diver, and then all of a sudden somebody's filming a movie, or, some billionaire wants to go like check out this wreck, and you've become an expert in your field. Well, you're going to get that call because that's what you do. So I just believe in the fact of, knowing what you want to do, having your intentions set, projecting those intentions so that you can't walk away from them. Right. And then following through, and that all of that to your point, as we've been calling, just being a man of action, just be in action and just doing the things, just to walk the walk. And you got to talk the talk, but you got to walk the walk.
Totally. So what's next?
So you mentioned, I'm still flying. Really, really happy to be working with the Polaris program. It's the first all civilian space program. So there's 3 missions, and there's 2 pieces that I'm really involved in.
No big deal, just a space mission,
Well, number 1 being the philanthropy director for the program. So just really good people. The CEO from our former company, Draken International, is now, the commander of this whole endeavor, Jared Isaacman, who's a personal friend and just a good dude. But he's, basically said, hey, if we have the opportunity to commercially go to space, we also need to fix things on Earth. And so I mentioned we were supporting the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and this is just the type of thinker that Jared is. He goes, dude, if we can cure childhood cancer, the biggest threat to our kids that just don't deserve this, then we don't need a Make-A-Wish Foundation, right? Like, let's just get at the root of this thing. So far, through his efforts on Inspiration 4, a mission that he flew a couple years ago, and going into Polaris program, we're at like $260 million raised for St. Jude to just cure childhood cancer. And so I love being, and on my layover, I had my weekly meeting with those folks on how we're moving the needle and how we can leverage the interesting things that we're doing. And so out of that, talent that we have and the necessity as part of the Polaris program is to train the civilian astronauts. For those that are aware of what goes on with space training, NASA astronauts have access to T-38s where they fly. I think they have to fly once a week at least because, it teaches checklist use and G's and checklist coordination and, crew coordination, all those things. If you're just a civilian, deciding that, hey, I'm going to go
like a speaker,
endeavor,
like me,
like Chris Tuff, who wants to go to space. But
I actually don't want to go to space. I was telling John the other day, I texted him because I had a very vivid nightmare, and I went to space with John, and I ran out of oxygen, and he didn't give me the oxygen, his oxygen, and I died in my nightmare.
But in real life, I would have given you my oxygen.
100%. That's why it was a nightmare. But okay, so. Do you realize how ridiculous this conversation that we're having is, right? Or no?
I don't.
Are you accustomed to it?
And that's the thing. And it's funny because I've never told this story, but you'll love it. So, remember Mike, and his last name escapes me, Yeti Mike from Surf Ranch.
Yeah.
So we're sitting at the opening ceremonies, right?
Surf Ranch. And you never had, context, right? Everyone, it's the most equalizing footing because no one's showing off, right? Like you're all there to support this nonprofit, the Moment Foundation, and everyone's in equal ground. And you truly do not know if someone's like a rock star or a Thunderbird pilot or whatever, right? Okay, so go on.
Yeah, I mean, it was just really, and I've called myself, I say I'm paralyzed by humility sometimes.
Yeah.
and it's not that I'm shy or not confident about it. It's just, I don't know how to talk about myself, because to me, I never want to come off like I'm being showy or flexing or whatever. Like, it's just my life, right? So talking to you, I mean, I know it does probably sound ridiculous, but this is just my life. This is just what I'm doing. And if I were to explain it to anybody, it just sounds crazy. And that's what my wife is. It's just like, you just can't even tell somebody what you do, because you just don't want to ever sound like an arrogant jerk and to ever be taken the wrong way. But it's funny, I'm sitting there and Mike and we're talking, we're having like this amazing like farm to table like meal. Remember that chicken was like awesome. Yeah. And Mike's like, yeah, and I'm like sitting here and like, there's Chris Tuff and there's this and that. Of course, Grant, and like, there's Michelle Curran, Mace, she's over there. And like last time I was here with her, like, it was like the second day before I even knew she was, that she was a Thunderbird pilot. And I was like, neat.
Shut up.
What was I say? Well, I am too. Yeah. Like, that's just like, it's not who I am. It's hard for me to talk about myself. But I know that that's such a limitation in the sense that, we've talked about success to significance, right?
Yep.
And, I know for me personally, I've had epic successes in my life, things, just for me to decide to join the Air Force at 17, to serve my country, do that for a couple years, even if I didn't go to, like, just to have that is a success in and of itself. And then everything after that is just like so gravy and cherries on top. Right. But passing the tools and the tips, that I could go be successful at something else and then something else. Like, I'm not in it now for that. I am all about how can I help other people be successful, whether it's through doing philanthropy, obviously the life-saving, where I'm laser focused on my job, for St. Jude through the Polaris program. That's number one. But then if it's, supporting women in aviation, which I'm hugely passionate about, because, and I just actually put a post out, like, I'm so spoiled. I saw this thing about, well, girls need to know they can fly. And I'm like, my mother-in-law is a 787 pilot. My sister-in-law's, flying an Airbus 320 for American. My kids are around, and we, donate, to scholarship funds, because our norm is not the norm for everybody. And I don't take that for granted. But, I have just been so spoiled because I'm around so many like female aviators that just totally kick butt that, I know that, I guess I could say I can take it for granted because it's just so normal for me to have Mother Hubbard, flying on my wing or me flying on her wing, or, whoever it was that I flew with, in the Air Force. And, so now it's just, it's not like this paying it forward type of thing, but it's truly being focused on why we're doing what we're doing and what's next. So I have made the conscious choice, and I've, just graduated heroic public speaking, so I can really dial it in, because I've been told for years, oh, you're such a great public speaker, you should do this all the time. And I was public speaking because I was teaching academics, and I was doing award ceremonies, and I was commissioning cadets and all of these things. So just by proxy of my everyday, I was a public speaker. And now that I don't have that as part of my job description, I have to actively go out and do it. So I made the commitment. Other than being, a senior fellow at a think tank, I mean, holy, like that, I'm doing that. I'm in my 4th year of hosting a aerospace podcast. It's been like a top 10 podcast from like, top 10 in like 30 countries or something like that. But, so now I'm consciously pivoting from all of those things to now take this show on the road. I love it. Because for me, the recipe, and we haven't even really touched on it yet, but I had to learn how to be a really good mentee. Right. I had to know what it was to say, like, if I want to do this thing, go to college, if I want to, take the hard road to become a cadet who then gets commissioned and goes to pilot training, like, I need to find and seek experts in that field and not be shy. It's like, it's like the dating thing. If you ask 100 people to date you, eventually someone's going to go out on a date with you. Right. But, so I would meet somebody in the grocery store. You and I are so similar in this regard. Like, my wife laughs at me. She's like, hey, you're talking to I'm the guy who's going to talk to you in the grocery store. I'm like, oh, wow. And, probably come out with a best friend. Like, you can't go on a flight without having a new best friend, right?
Yeah. Ben and I were just talking about that. Okay. Well, but I need to ask you, and I'm so interested to hear the answer to this question, which is the one question I ask everyone on the podcast, which is, what's your dream as someone that's accomplished so much in their life? What, John, is your dream?
All right. Fighter pilots don't cry, but it's kind of warm in here. So, my eyes could start sweating. My dream is to keep getting the phone call or the email. God, you did this to me, Krista.
I had to.
Where somebody says to me, "You changed my life." I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if you didn't help me.
Love it.
And so I am, and what has really sent me into this whole vector of my life now is because I have, luckily, a stack of those, cards and those messages. And, I just got a letter in the mail with a patch and a beautiful handwritten message from Matt A. Since he's active duty, I'll respect keeping his last name secret. But, and he goes, "Sir, I got accepted to pilot training. And you wanted me to be a pilot when I was your cadet. And I didn't think I could do it, so I didn't apply. And then for 7 years, I was doing a job that I liked, but I realized that I had this thing in the back of my mind that I could be a pilot. And he's getting ready to graduate pilot training."
Love it.
And so that's the significance piece. Luckily, I feel very blessed to have had my own successes. And now I just want to enable other people to get off the fence, to enable them to be in action, to teach them how to be a great mentee. And for those that have been successful and they're trying to figure out, now I have all this success. And you and I have been in these circles, right? We're around these men and women that have crushed it, in conventional, metrics. And I have talked to many, many people that have a lot of money in the bank and they have cool houses and cars and they go on great vacations and they're miserable people. Yeah. And they're sad and they're depressed and they're suicidal and they don't know what to do with themselves. And I'm like, you were a titan in your industry. So how many people are you mentoring? And they go, "Well, I help, cousins and kids and whatever, people, I mentor people." I go, no. To be a mentor, have you established a contract between you and your mentee? And they look at me and the light goes on. They go, "I am not really a mentor." Have you sat down and said, "All right, Chris, you came to me," or you seek out those people and say, "I know I can mentor you. We're going to meet once a week. Phone call, text," right? And you go through the litany and we're going to have this formal relationship for 3 months, 6 months, a year, right? When you do that to somebody and you impact their lives in that way, where from a formal relationship, you're in, and you have now projected your commitment to them, it's amazing to see when they step up.
I love it, dude.
So I have consciously 5 mentees, no kidding, calls, check in, you text me whenever you want, and honestly, sometimes these are, maybe the figures that we didn't have in our lives.
I need contracts for my mentees, Ben.
I'm telling you, it works because people want to be held accountable, right?
100%.
I mean, how many times have you been in a job or a role where you're like, "Hey, I want this job. So give me all the responsibility."
One of my biggest issues is I look at some people that I try to help and they have no action, right? And maybe part of that is because there's no contract, but you're not going to know unless you start, right? And so it's really interesting, looking at it through this framework. And yeah, I love it. I love it. And John, I'm just so excited to watch our paths continue to cross and for us to continue to inspire and call each other on a whim, whatever. Yeah. It's been almost every single day, right?
Right.
And it's just so awesome. So,
but, not only is it just being of action, but also I want to live a life of adventure. I want to continue to live a life of adventure, right? So, we have surfing in common, wake surfing, foil boarding, alpine mountain climbing yet?
Not yet.
Yeah. So, taking those challenges on, and really just truly, we talk about the soul wiggle and being really happy, right?
Yep.
And I think it's once you understand, the fact that we all have our pasts, and you got to come to peace with that really quick. Because like every minute that anybody wastes on stuff that they can't change from the past, like, there's a great way to get through it. And if you need help doing it, find that help. And then stop worrying so much about the future, right? Be thinking about the future, but it's living each day with intention so that you're enjoying your day, right? And you will slowly chip away at that future that you want. And I am big into having a vision for what I want my life to be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now, but also living every day as consciously as I can, to where if I don't wake up tomorrow or something bad happens, there's no regrets.
Totally.
So, and we've talked about travel and things like that. And of course, I think, we're, as my mother-in-law always jokes about, if I have the big one, like I kiss on my kids and tell them I love them, and I FaceTime and they know where I am, and I talk to them. And, if that was my last day in an interaction, right, there's no like, oh, I wish I would have kissed my kids goodbye.
Yeah, totally.
So it's just being conscious in all of those moments, and also investing in the relationships. And then it's also, knowing when to say no, right? And those types of things, because if it's going to waste your time or it's not going to be impactful, for you or for the other person, it's just, levying up early that you don't want to waste the time, because we know that's the one thing that no matter how wealthy or successful you are, you cannot buy any more of.
Yep, time.
So that's what we're doing.
Well, speaking of time, I think we're at time.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of
I know. Well, hopefully this wasn't a waste of time. So
dude, it was awesome.
I feel like we got bogged down in a lot of early on stage.
Dude, I love it. And dude, thank you so much. And we're going to keep them going.
Yeah. Love it, brother.
Hell yeah.